puzzle started with a prayer, a question, a thought that I had when first approaching the hotel in August 1967, just after the Israelis had retaken Jerusalem. And what I saw was very happy Israelis celebrating, smiles on their faces, and very sullen Palestinians. And I had the thought immediately, these people don't like each other. They don't get along. If there's anything I can do to help make peace, let me know. It wasn't until I came up with the model that we're now using, the inverted T geometry, recognized that that's what Ezekiel was describing in Ezekiel 37 in Haftarah Vayigash, and that's where the code comes from. That when we recover our language, we will have one unified nation, one unified language under one God, and that's when there'll be peace and security. This is Ezekiel's prophecy, telling me why all these years I stumbled on the alphabet. The alphabet was in front of me because I made that prayer. I was trying to find a way to make peace. I didn't know the alphabet was the key. But many years later, I finally read the Haftarah and realized that's what Ezekiel was saying. That by means we can discuss, we don't know what's really going to happen. It seems to me that this piece of the puzzle is a vital part of what it takes to make lasting peace and security for Am Israel, Eretz Israel, and the Torah. And so it could be fulfilled. This is not science per se, but it's making use of the scientific method, which differs from what scholars and business people do, and everyone else. In the business world, in the everyday world, we put our theories on the table, and we try to prove them. And we stand up for them, and we give a lot of strong support for our ideas. Scientists are persnickety. The scientific method is in part based on what's called Popperian falsifiability. Popper was a philosopher of science, and he said, what you do is you put a thesis forward, and then you have all your colleagues, and you marshal all your own means to disprove your thesis. You throw stones at it, you chip away at it. It's kind of like Sherlock Holmes. When you cut away all the things that don't work, what's left does work. So what I've done is put hypotheses on the table in front of me, in front of others, and attempted to present them and then criticize them. What's wrong with this? What's incomplete? Why isn't it good enough? That's why we got rid of the light in the meeting tent and went out and found the hand model. The light in the meeting tent, as I describe in the book, was a wonderful idea. Symmetry and asymmetry, a flame and a tetrahedron. It fulfills all kinds of discussions, but there's no personal experience. And without personal experience, you couldn't be sure it was real. I couldn't be sure. So that's what I was so startled when I go to the Marin flea market. We're recording this in Marin, and the flea market was now in Marin City, and I see this large red apple-shaped ice bucket, and I bought it. It's sitting there on the windowsill, and I looked at it and I said, if I put the geometry that I was working with, light meeting tent geometry, and the torus knot geometry on the ice bucket, on the apple, I didn't know what would happen. But when I did it, it exactly fit 6 copies of my hand. The light in the meeting tent, the little spiral vortex, turned into a hand, a model hand. And that's one of the things we're proposing that was missed by the scholars. It was missed. It's not known to the current rabbis. So the book is about how my self-criticism of the light in the meeting tent led to my looking for a deeper meaning, and eventually it paid off. So this is the use of the scientific method. You put a proposal on the table, it's a little vortex in a tetrahedron, and you criticize it. Well, it's wonderful. It makes all the letters, but it doesn't make them in any particular order, and there's no personal experience.
And what we found, and this is really quite startling, is when we simplified it mathematically, we ended up producing a form that looked just like this. This is the form we actually made. This is a minimal geometric way to represent the way the first verse of Genesis forms itself when its letters are paired up. This object, this entirely asymmetrical object, which in the past we've identified as a flame of consciousness. Hebrew letters are said to come from flame. Arabic letters are said to come from flame. Shadows of this object are all of these Hebrew letters. Same one object generates all of these letters of the alphabet.
And something told me that until I could find a way to connect it to personal experience, and until I could generate the letters in a meaningful way, it was kind of arbitrary.
We've also discovered, even more startlingly, that this is not just a flame representing the flame of consciousness, but it's also a model hand representing our self-awareness. It's our hand that designates us as special in the animal world. It's our opposable thumb that is associated with our ability to make and use language and to make and use tools. It is from the word for hand in Latin, manus, that we are called humans. And further, it's from the region of our mind that controls our hand that we derive the regions that control our speech. And there is another point that needs to be added. Not only in Hebrew tradition is it taught that the letters are made of fire or flame, but they are also said to come from Yod. And that is taken to mean the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Yod, which is the component that makes up all the letter shapes. But Yod also means hand, this hand. And when you look at this form from various different positions, you see all of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
You know, I'm far from the first person to read all these references on the alphabet. The history of the alphabet, the French Academy, I've got books on this, put forward dozens of models based on hand gestures that made Hebrew letter shapes. The trouble is they were all photorealistic hands. They were not idealized, and no one could agree on what it should be, and the whole enterprise fell apart and discredited the thought. I can come along and say, it's not your hand or my hand, it's an ideal hand, as Ezekiel tells us. When you unify the stick of Judah and the stick of Ephraim in the hand, that's when you get the form that generates the alphabet. And the idealized model presents the letters on your hand in a meaningful way. How is it meaningful? Because the shape of the letter you see corresponds to the meaning of the name of the letter in your concepts, in your mind.
And the name of the letter Pei, its name means mouth. And you see it when you make this gesture. That's the Hebrew letter Pei. Now you'll see it in my left hand, I'll see it in my right hand. So it's a symmetrical set. This gesture produces the letter Zion. Anybody want to guess what Zion means? How about project?
Form follows function. It's not like an arbitrary shape for an arbitrary thought. It's a form that is directly derived from the function of the name of the letter. Big idea. And I didn't realize at first how important it was. It's now critical. That needs discussion, and people should question, well, are you sure about this? And what did you do? What did you not do? There are a lot of details. But the bottom line is, put a proposal, the scientific method says, put a proposal on the table, the best one you can come up with, and then try to criticize it. Don't build it up like a salesman, take it down like a critic, until you can distill it to the basic elements that are irrefutable. What we're proposing is not in competition with the current understanding that's out there. There's thousands of people writing translations of Kabbalistic texts, and from all different perspectives, and they all have a right to their opinion. If I've done my work by using the scientific method properly, if I've done my work properly, that this is not based on an opinion, it's based on a hypothesis that has faced every form of criticism you can imagine. And these are demonstratable principles, not just beliefs. And that's what we found. That's the basis of what we're doing. The rabbis teach that we go with Hillel because in the dispute between Hillel and Shammai only presented his argument. Hillel presented Shammai's argument before he presented his own. You give honor to the other first. You don't start off with the assumption you know everything. You start off with the assumption everyone knows something, and you take the strongest critic and start with that. And then you contrast what you find with the best example of what doesn't correspond to what you're proposing. You make the best possible argument when you do that. And it's a decent thing to do. Most of what we're talking about is based on a kind of humility, a kind of willingness to believe that this is a wonderful universe. And we're good creatures, but we're not always good, and we're not perfect, and there's always more to learn. And sometimes you have to go into territory that is not comfortable. But if you're honest, you have to do it. And if you're not honest, then you don't get the best result. I spent thousands of hours just staring at shapes and reading textbooks and all kinds of theories about what's important about different things. And there are many teachings that apply to the Golden Rule. The rabbis say, they say that when Hillel was asked if he could present what he could explain what Torah is while standing on one foot, that would be desirable. So this is what Hillel said when challenged to do that. The story may be apocryphal, but this is the story that comes down. Is that if you're asked what is the foundational principles of Torah, what is the summary of the work, he said, don't do to others what's hateful to yourself. A version of the Golden Rule. And there are many different versions. We talk about that in the book in some detail. Why is the Golden Rule so important, so central? Philosophers and scientists agree. Artists agree. The golden proportion shows up in many places. The golden proportion is an analytic representation of part of the Golden Rule. And more recently, I've realized that there's more than one Golden Rule. I was only looking at one, and that's the one on the first poster that I came up. I was thinking about what is the geometry that represents the Golden Rule. Don't do to others what's hateful to yourself, or do unto others. But that one, I couldn't get any place with that. It was too complicated. So I went to the Hermetic version, which is also in Kabbalah, as above, so below. There's a principle in heaven, in the abstract higher realm, that when you apply it, it produces a similar principle in human experience on the earth plane. As above, so below. And as I drew on the poster, the first thing I thought of was, well, the obvious thing, as above, so below, is you take an image, a simple image, and you write it above, and you write it below it. You duplicate it. So it could be a point on top of a point, or a line with a parallel line above and a parallel line below. And so there's a line above and a line below. You don't get anything from that. It's not productive. So I literally, I'm trying to remember now, it was hundreds of hours. I just ran it through my mind. How can you represent as above, so below in a more elegant and meaningful way than just a couple of parallel lines? And I ended up with the phrase, the one going upward is the same as the whole going under. That if you look up, there's a single principle, one, and there should be a corresponding principle below it that is the whole story. One above and whole below. And I ended up drawing an inverted T with a vertical line over a horizontal line. The one going up is the vertical line, reaching to God, to the transcendent, and the one below is like the earth plane. It's like represents the ground we stand on. And then it hit me. But a vertical line on top of a horizontal line in an inverted T, that vertical line is metaphorically like a foot standing on the earth. It's Torah on one foot. This is the image that corresponds to what Hillel said. I later realized that there were multiple ways to see that what goes around comes around. It corresponds to as above, so below in a different way. And I went through the literature. I found a reference in the Hermetic literature from the 1500s by Giordano Bruno, a famous mystic and scientist. And this was in Pickover's Loom of God book, a sacred geometry book. And it shows the same geometry. It's lost in a more complicated figure, but it's drawn properly. It also has another quality which people don't recognize. I think I first saw this in J. Caprap's book, where he shows the Pythagorean triangle, 3, 4, 5 triangle, has the same angle as the top angle of this as above, so below triangle. So it connects to the Greek Pythagorean traditions, and it has other elegant features. This triangle has an apex angle of approximately 53 degrees. This is when I realized that this particular geometry was probably what they were referring to in the story about Hillel. This was a picture in elegant, geometric, pristine form of Torah on 1 foot. The 1 foot is the vertical line, and the horizontal line is the earth plane that stands on. And if that was a conjecture. Now, what did I just say? We use the scientific method. We tried to destroy it, prove it's not true. But the more I researched it, the more it made sense. The more detail I got, the more historical discussion I read, the more discussion of what Hillel meant I read, the more I was convinced that that's what they were referring to. It wasn't standing literally on 1 foot. It was an elegant geometric model of the geometry of as above, so below, represented by standing on 1 foot, a vertical line over a horizontal line, and it's an inverted T. And that gave me this particular triangle. Then I'm reading for the 12th time the classic of the Hasidic material in our time, the Tanya. And Tanya has an essay by the Alter Rebbe, and he says it's called, the essay's name is, which is our next poster, it's The Gate of Unity and Faith. Shir HaYechudah HaAmin. Unity and faith. Well, that's a pair. What if they were corresponding to the two lines? What if unity was the vertical line and faith was the horizontal line? Is that plausible? Well, think about it. Unity is about 1. It's 1 vertical line. It reaches up from the God point, the high point. He describes more of his features. And the word many, that could be the 1 and the many. The word emunah, which is translated as faith, has a root in it, which corresponds to the idea of a manifold, of more than one, a group. So you have a model of the 1 and the many. And I'm reading this, and I get to this. We can go get the text. I'll summarize it. This was written about 1800, roughly. Astronomy knew the size of the Earth, knew the size of the sun. This rabbi was educated. He was writing for educated people. And he says at one point, for example, the sun, whose body is finite and limited quantitatively, being approximately 167 times the size of the globe of the Earth. What? 167 times? The sun is 167 times the globe of the Earth? It's not true. And there's footnotes on the page in the Tanya, which attempts to rationalize this. They don't do a good job of it. We could read the quote. It is not plausible. So I'm looking at this number 167. What's 167 correspond to? Well, they're talking about globe of the Earth. They didn't just say Earth. They said globe. Well, that implies a sphere, a circle. And I knew from past experience that sometimes if I multiplied or divided by pi, I got a meaningful result. So I took 167 and divided by pi. And that gives me 53.1, give or take. The apex angle in the drawing of the triangle is 53 degrees. That's really suspicious, because that drawing, this inverted T geometry, makes sense of what the rabbi says. He also says, and I quote, "He created with it the light through the utterance, 'Let there be light,' which is the spreading forth and flow of the light from above into the world, and its diffusion in the world from one end to the other. As above, so below." So I took And this took me weeks of repetition. I was just staring and trying. What does this mean? What does it mean? All kinds of things. I tried all kinds of things. I finally realized that this corresponded to a discussion in the Psalms, where there's a quote that says, I think it's Psalm 84. It says, "A sun and a shield is the Lord God, is Hashem Elohim." Now, some translations get that wrong. They break it in half. But the Hasidic version is correct. And if you take the sun to be a source, Hashem to be a source, and Elohim to be the shield, the earth plane, then there's a contrast between the sun and the shield. The shield is what a soldier carries to absorb the blows that come at them. So it's an absorber. And I had already read over the years many cosmologies, and I remember one by Penrose. And Penrose asks, where do the plants get their negentropy, their life energy? Why do plants grow? Where do they get the information from? And Penrose points out that the information that comes in the photons from a single high source like the sun is much greater than photons that radiate back from the earth to the sky. This earth to the sky is low information, it's spread out over a big angle, and the photons from the sun come in column. And the difference in a photon between a collimated and a diffuse one is the negentropic, the life force, the energy, the momentum that the plants use to grow. And so Penrose makes a drawing where there's the sun in the sky and there's the earth below, and one is the source and the other one is the shield. But the sun is not, it's very bright and hot and small in the sky, but it's not infinite. I learned in high school one thing you can do to test a theory is to take it to its extremes. And I replaced the sun with an infinitely bright point and the sky with an infinitely absorbing surround, shield, and that is a model of the negentropic flow from Hashem to Elohim, which is modeled by our inverted C. And I realized later, as we'll go through this, that also corresponds to something of central importance in all of physics, the Dirac delta function and its transform spectrum.
But this is part of a legitimate bridge between various seemingly opposite elements in our society, whether it's between science and religion, whether it's between the secular world and the observant world. These same models also generate other sacred alphabets that came later. The Greek alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, are also generated by the same form that the beginning of the text of Genesis draws for us. So we ought to be able to show that some of these other traditions have a connection at this mathematical level, at this consciousness level, and that thereby traditions can respect each other. Now, this isn't a matter of making everybody's religion the same. Far from it. Those are totally different embodiments. We approach from different directions. But the basis, the common element in our consciousness, in our hands, literally, is what we have. And it's the alphabet. And I think that's very beautiful.